Nobody understood why the stranger walked straight to me, asking about a renovation meeting scheduled for 7:30 that I never booked. His simple question silenced the entire room, shifting every gaze to the screen displaying the beach house my family claimed was shared property. They had no idea the deed had been in my name for 6 years. Tonight, amidst the champagne and speeches, I finally decided to let them destroy themselves with their own lie. My name is Violet Herrera. I am 36 years old, and if you looked at my portfolio back in Harborcrest, Maine, you would see the work of a woman who commands respect. My architectural studio specializes in coastal residential design, crafting structures that withstand salt air and winter gales while looking like pages torn from a glossy magazine. I manage budgets that run into the millions, oversee contractors who do not dare cut corners, and have a waitlist of clients 6 months long. But here, standing on the travertine terrace of the Silver Dunes Country Club in Crescent Bay, California, none of that mattered. To the people sipping white wine under the warm glow of the string lights, I was just the other daughter, the one who left, the one who did something vague with drawing and houses a continent away. I swirled the ice in my glass of sparkling water, my back pressed against the cool mahogany of the outdoor bar. From this vantage point, I could see the entire ecosystem of my father's retirement party. It was a lavish affair, exactly the kind of production my mother lived for. There were at least 200 guests, a mix of hospital administrators, fellow doctors, and the local elite of Crescent Bay who treated charity galas like competitive sports. The Pacific Ocean churned rhythmically in the distance, a dark void beyond the manicured greens of the golf course. But no one was looking at the view. They were looking at them. Danica and Elliot. My sister and her husband were moving through the crowd with the synchronized grace of a figure skating pair. Danica was wearing a shimmering champagne gown that hugged her frame perfectly, catching the light every time she threw her head back to laugh at a joke that likely was not that funny. Elliot, in a bespoke navy suit that screamed billable hours, had his hand perpetually on the small of her back, guiding her from one handshake to another. He was a partner at a mid-sized law firm in town, the kind of man who carried business cards in his pajama pockets and thought the loudest voice in the room was automatically the smartest. They were working the room as if this were their party, not Dad's. I watched Elliot lean in close to the chief of surgery, gesturing expansively with his free hand. I could almost hear the tone of his voice from here, confident, slightly condescending, oozing that specific brand of unearned authority that wealthy, mediocre men seem to have in unlimited supply. "Violet, I didn't know you made it in." I turned to see Mrs. Gable, a neighbor from my childhood, peering at me over the rim of her glasses. She looked surprised, as if I were a hologram that might flicker and vanish. "Hello, Mrs. Gable," I said, putting on the polite smile I saved for difficult zoning board meetings. "Of course I made it. It is a big night for Dad." "It certainly is," she said, her eyes already drifting back toward Danica. "Your sister looks stunning, doesn't she? And those 2 boys of hers are just angels. I saw pictures of the little one's soccer game on Facebook. You must be so proud to be an aunt." "Very proud," I said, the words tasting like chalk. "And what are you up to, dear? Still painting houses up north?" "Designing them," I corrected gently. "I run an architectural firm in Maine." "Oh, that is nice," she said, her tone flat, the way one compliments a child on a finger painting. "Well, do not stay over here in the shadows all night. Go say hello to your brother-in-law. Elliot is just doing so well lately." She patted my arm and drifted away before I could respond. I took a long sip of my water. This was the narrative. This had always been the narrative. Danica was the anchor, the success story, the one who stayed in Crescent Bay to give them grandchildren and Sunday dinners. I was the satellite that had spun out of orbit, the flighty artist who lived in a cold state for reasons they could not comprehend. They had no idea that my firm had grossed over $2 million last year. They did not know that the painting I did involved complex structural engineering and battling coastal erosion. When I tried to tell them about my work during our infrequent phone calls, their eyes would glaze over. Mom would interrupt to ask if I was dating anyone, and Dad would hand the phone to Danica so she could tell me about Elliot's new Tesla. Eventually, I stopped trying to correct them. It was easier to let them think I was scraping by. It created a comfortable distance, a buffer zone where my real life could remain untouched by their judgment. The music lowered, a soft jazz interlude fading out as the spotlight swept across the terrace, landing on the small stage set up near the head table. My father, Dr. Robert Herrera, stepped up to the microphone. He looked older than I remembered, his hair fully white now, but he still had that commanding presence that had terrified nurses and reassured patients for 40 years. "Thank you, everyone," Dad said, his voice booming slightly before he adjusted the mic stand. 35 years at St. Jude's. It feels like 35 minutes. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I watched Mom beaming from the front table, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "I have saved a lot of brains in that time," Dad continued, chuckling at his own standard joke. "But the smartest thing I ever did was build a life right here in Crescent Bay." He launched into the standard retirement speech, the mentors, the long nights, the sacrifices. Then came the family section. I stiffened, bracing myself. "None of this would be possible without my rock, my wife, Elena," he said, gesturing to Mom. She stood up for a brief, teary wave. "And of course, the legacy we leave behind." He turned his gaze to the table where Danica and Elliot sat. "Danica," he said, his voice softening with genuine affection. "My beautiful girl, you have given your mother and me more joy than we deserve. You gave us Leo and Sam. You stayed close, kept us young, and you have been the heart of this family whenever things got tough. Watching you build a life with Elliot has been the highlight of my later years." Danica beamed, squeezing Elliot's hand. Elliot puffed his chest out, nodding solemn acknowledgement like a war hero receiving a medal. "And Violet," Dad added, almost as an afterthought, scanning the back of the room until he found me by the bar. "Glad you could fly out from Maine to be here. It means a lot to have the whole gang together." That was it. 2 sentences, one acknowledging my presence, the other grouping me into the gang. No mention of my career, no pride in the independence I had built, just a nod to the fact that I had purchased a plane ticket. I felt a familiar, cold weight settle in my stomach. It was not jealousy, exactly. I did not want Danica's life. I did not want the country club membership or the pressure of being the perfect local daughter, but the erasure still stung. It was the confirmation that in their eyes, I was a guest in my own family history. I set my glass down on the bar, the condensation slick against my palm. I considered slipping away to the restroom, or maybe just leaving altogether. I had shown my face. I had brought a gift. A rare first edition of a medical history book Dad had wanted for years, which was currently sitting on the gift table, dwarfed by whatever flashy thing Elliot had bought. But before I could move, Danica stood up. She took the microphone from Dad, her smile bright and practiced. "Oh, Dad, do not sit down yet," she chirped, her voice amplified across the silent terrace. "We are not done celebrating you." She turned to the crowd, her face glowing with the excitement of someone who knows they are about to win the room. "Everyone, Elliot and I have been working on something special for months," Danica announced. "We wanted to give Dad and Mom a gift that is not just a thing, but a promise, a gift that honors our family roots and looks forward to our future." Elliot stood up then, buttoning his suit jacket as he walked to the center of the stage to stand beside her. He signaled to the AV technician at the back of the room. "We know how much the coast means to this family," Elliot said, his voice smooth and projecting well without the mic, though he took it anyway. "And we know that as you enter this new chapter, rest and legacy are the most important things. So, we decided to take a little initiative." My stomach tightened. A strange, prickling sensation ran down the back of my neck. It was the same instinct that hit me when I walked onto a job site and realized a load-bearing wall was in the wrong place. Something was structurally unsound about this moment. "We have a surprise," Danica said, her eyes sparkling. "A project that Elliot and I are going to spearhead, starting tomorrow morning. A place for all of us." She gestured dramatically to the large projection screen behind them. I held my breath. I knew what they were going to show before the pixels even aligned. I knew it because I knew them. I knew their entitlement, their assumption that family meant what is yours is ours, and their complete lack of boundaries. But knowing it did not stop the shock from freezing my blood when the image flickered onto the screen. I stood paralyzed by the bar, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. The air on the terrace suddenly felt very thin. I watched my sister and her husband beam at the crowd, basking in the anticipation, completely unaware that they were standing on a trapdoor. They thought they were unveiling a generous surprise. They thought they were the heroes of the evening. But I was the only one in the room who knew the truth about the property they were about to claim as their own. And as the projector hummed to life, I realized that my role as the passive, invisible sister was about to end. Not because I wanted a fight, but because they were about to try and steal something that had belonged to me, and only me, for 6 years. The lights on the terrace dimmed further, focusing all attention on the projection screen that had unrolled behind the small stage. Danica held the microphone with a practiced ease, the kind she usually reserved for PTA meetings where she politely bullied other mothers into volunteering. She raised a hand, silencing the murmur of the crowd, basking in the control she held over the room. "Please, everyone, take your seats," Danica said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "What Elliot and I are about to show you is not just a renovation, it is a restoration of our hearts." A hush fell over the guests. My father sat forward in his chair, a glass of scotch resting on his knee, looking genuinely intrigued. Beside him, Mom clutched a linen napkin, ready to weep at whatever sentimental montage was coming next. The screen flickered to life. I stopped breathing, the glass of water in my hand tilted dangerously, sloshing cold liquid over my fingers, but I did not feel the chill. I could only stare at the image projected in high definition for 200 people to see. It was a photograph of a weathered, charming cedar shingle cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. The trim was painted a soft, seafoam green, and the front porch was lined with pots of hydrangeas. Above the image, in an elegant serif font, were the words, "The Herrera Family Beach House Project." The air left my lungs. That was Seaglass Cove Cottage. It was the house where we had spent summers as children. Yes, it was the place where I had learned to swim and where Dad had taught Danica to drive. But what the slide omitted, what my sister was conveniently ignoring, was that the cottage was no longer the Herrera family home in the collective sense. It was mine. I had purchased it from my parents exactly 6 years ago. They had been struggling with cash flow after Dad made some poor stock market decisions, and the upkeep on a second property had become a burden. I had stepped in, buying it at fair market value with the first significant earnings from my firm. The deed was in my name. The property taxes were paid from my bank account. The insurance policy listed Violet Herrera as the sole owner. Yet there it was, being displayed like a communal heirloom. "We all know this place," Danica cooed into the microphone, gesturing to the screen as if she were introducing a beloved relative. "Seaglass Cove. It is where Mom and Dad taught us the value of family. It is where we learned that no matter how far you go, you always have a home to come back to. But over the years, life got busy. The cottage has fallen a bit behind." She paused for dramatic effect, looking out at the audience with wide, earnest eyes. Elliot and I could not stand to see our history fade. So, we decided it was time to step up. We are taking the burden off Mom and Dad's shoulders. The audacity was so sharp it felt physical, like a needle pressing behind my eyes. She was framing this as a rescue mission. She was implying that the house was rotting away under the negligence of aging parents, completely erasing the fact that I had spent the last 3 years meticulously stabilizing the foundation and upgrading the electrical grid. Work that was invisible to the naked eye, but essential for the building's survival. Elliot stepped forward then, taking the microphone from his wife. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and placed one hand in his pocket, adopting the posture of a visionary CEO unveiling a new skyscraper. "Thanks, babe," he said, flashing a grin that showed too many teeth. Like Danica said, we are not just slapping a coat of paint on the old girl, we are reimagining the legacy. He clicked a remote in his hand. The slide changed. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Even I felt my jaw tighten. The image on the screen was a sleek, hyper-modern architectural rendering. It showed the modest cedar cottage transformed into a glass and steel monstrosity. The cozy front porch was gone, replaced by a cantilevered viewing deck that looked aggressive and sterile. "We are calling this the Herrera Retreat," Elliot announced, his voice booming. "We have secured a budget of $300,000 to make this happen." $300,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. The guests murmured in appreciation. To them, it was a staggering display of generosity. A son-in-law willing to drop nearly $350,000 on his wife's family home. He was a saint. He was the golden boy. "We are blowing out the back wall," Elliot continued, using the laser pointer to circle the area on the screen. "Installing floor-to-ceiling retractable glass panels. We are adding a chef's kitchen outdoors with a built-in pizza oven and a wet bar. Perfect for the kind of entertaining a man of Robert's stature deserves." "And look at the Master Suite edition," Danica chimed in, pointing to a second-story box that had been slapped onto the rendering like a tumor. "We want Mom and Dad to wake up every morning and see the ocean from their bed." I stared at the renderings, my mind racing. The style was familiar. The clean lines, the specific use of sustainable teak accents, the way the deck integrated with the cliffside topography. It was a bastardized, superficial mimicry of my own architectural signature. They had likely looked at my website, stolen the visual language of my professional portfolio, and handed it to some cheap draftsman to create a hollow copy. They were using my own aesthetic to deface my property. "Isn't that wonderful?" a woman next to me whispered, clapping her hands. "Your sister is so thoughtful." I could not speak. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare where I was screaming but no sound was coming out. If I shouted now, if I stormed the stage and screamed that they were trespassing on my deed, I would look like the jealous, petty sister ruining her father's retirement party. I would be the villain who could not handle Danica's success. "But wait, there is more," Elliot said, raising a finger. "We know how slow construction can be in California. Permits, red tape, all that nonsense." He laughed, and the other businessmen in the room chuckled with him. A club of men who believed rules were for other people. "But I pulled some strings," Elliot said with a wink. "I called in some favors downtown. We are not waiting 6 months to start. We are not waiting 6 weeks." He paused, letting the tension build. "The demolition crew arrives tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. The applause was thunderous. My father stood up and hugged Mom, who was openly weeping now. Danica and Elliot embraced on stage, waving to the crowd like politicians who had just won a landslide election. Tomorrow morning. My blood ran cold. They were not just talking about plans. They were sending bulldozers. They were going to tear down the load-bearing wall I had just reinforced. They were going to rip up the drought-resistant garden I had planted by hand. They were going to destroy my home, and they were doing it with the applause of the entire town. I looked at my parents. Dad was shaking Elliot's hand vigorously, clapping him on the back. Mom was holding Danica's face in her hands, whispering words of gratitude. I was less than 30 feet away, but I might as well have been on the moon. I was the owner, the architect, the one who actually paid the bills, and I had been completely written out of the script. "Unbelievable," I whispered to myself. The word felt small and useless against the wall of noise. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray with a trembling hand. I needed to leave. I needed to get to my car, call my lawyer, and file an emergency injunction. I had to stop those trucks. But as I turned toward the exit, a ripple of disturbance cut through the celebration near the entrance of the terrace. The applause was dying down, replaced by confused murmurs. A young man in a Silver Dunes staff uniform was looking frantically around the room. He seemed terrified, his eyes darting between the VIP guests and the manager who was hissing at him to get back to work. But the staff member was being blocked by someone. A man had stepped onto the terrace. He was not wearing a tuxedo or a cocktail dress. He was wearing dusty work boots, dark jeans, and a plaid button-down shirt that had seen better days. He held a weathered leather portfolio under one arm and a tablet in the other. He looked like he had just walked off a job site, which, in this crowd of silk and cashmere, made him look like an alien. He ignored the manager trying to shepherd him away. He ignored the offended glares of the doctors' wives. He scanned the room with a laser focus, his expression hard and unamused. The music stopped. The chatter died out as people realized this was not part of the show. "Sir, you cannot be here," Elliot called out from the stage, his voice taking on that sharp courtroom edge. "This is a private event." The man in the work boots did not even look at Elliot. He continued to scan the faces in the crowd until his eyes locked onto me. I froze. I did not know him, but the recognition in his eyes was absolute. He walked past the stunned guests, marching straight toward where I stood by the bar. The crowd parted for him, confusion rippling through the air. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice gravelly and loud enough to carry across the silent terrace. "I was told the owner is here." He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He looked tired, annoyed, and completely unimpressed by the luxury surrounding us. "Are you Violet Herrera?" he asked. The name rang out. Heads turned. My father frowned, lowering his drink. Danica's smile faltered on stage. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. "I am." The man tapped his tablet screen and held it up. Though he was not showing it to me, he was holding it up like evidence. "I am Grant Whitmore," he said. "Whitmore Construction. I have a confirmation for a site walkthrough at Seaglass Cove tomorrow morning at 7:30 to discuss the foundation drainage and the roof repairs." He looked over my shoulder at the screen on the stage, where the rendering of the glass monstrosity still glowed. He let out a short, derisive scoff. "But I see someone else thinks they are running a demolition crew on my site," Grant said, turning back to me. "So, Ms. Herrera, since I drove 2 hours to get here because your email said it was urgent, do you want to tell me why there are 2 different sets of plans for a house that the county says belongs to you?" The silence that followed was total. It was not the polite silence of a listening crowd. It was the suffocating, vacuum-sealed silence of a room that just realized a bomb had been ticking in the corner the entire time. All eyes, my father's confused stare, Danica's panicked glare, Elliot's sudden stillness, swung to me. They were waiting for me to apologize, to explain away the mistake, to defer to the man in the suit on stage. Instead, I looked at Grant Whitmore, the stranger who had just handed me a loaded gun, and I smiled. "I am so glad you are here, Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice clear and carrying to the back of the room. "We have a lot to talk about." The silence on the terrace was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the sounds of the distant ocean. Grant Whitmore stood before me like a monolith in dusty denim, oblivious to the fact that he had just shattered the carefully curated atmosphere of my father's retirement gala. He was not looking at the stunned guests or the frozen waiters. He was looking at me, waiting for an answer. His tablet held out like a shield. I took a step forward, moving out of the shadows of the bar and into the center of the room. For the first time all night, I did not feel like the extra in Danica's movie. I felt like the director. "I am Violet Herrera," I repeated, my voice steady. "And yes, we have an appointment, though I thought we agreed to meet at the site, not here." Grant nodded, tapping the screen of his device with a calloused finger. I went to the site, found a padlock on the gate that was not there last week. Then I saw the trucks parked down the road with logos I did not recognize. Demolition crews. I figured if the job scope had changed from a restoration to a teardown, I deserved a heads up. "Your assistant said you were here." "I do not have an assistant, Grant," I said quietly. "Exactly," he replied, his eyes narrowing, "which is why I drove over." On the stage, the paralysis that had gripped my brother-in-law finally broke. Elliot descended the stairs with a hurried, aggressive stride, his polished dress shoes clicking sharply on the stone. He adjusted his tie, putting on his best courtroom face, the one he used when he was trying to intimidate a witness who knew too much. "Excuse me, sir," Elliot said, his voice booming with forced conviviality as he approached us. He positioned himself between me and Grant, effectively cutting me off. "I think there has been a massive communication error here. I am Elliot Davis. I am the one managing this project." Elliot extended a hand. Grant looked at it, then looked at Elliot's face, and kept his arms firmly crossed over his chest. The rejection was so blatant that a few guests near the front gasped. "I do not have a contract with an Elliot Davis," Grant said flatly. "I have a contract with the owner of the property." Elliot laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. Right. Well, as you can see from the presentation," he gestured vaguely back at the screen where the monstrosity of glass and steel was still glowing. "My wife and I are the ones financing the upgrade. We are talking about a $300,000 investment here. Buddy, if you are the contractor we hired, you should probably stop interrupting the party and start thanking us for the business." Grant finally turned his full attention to Elliot. The expression on the older builder's face was one of profound irritation. "300,000?" Grant repeated. He looked back at his tablet, scrolled down, and then turned the screen so the nearby guests could see. "That is interesting, because the contract I have here, signed 2 weeks ago, is for a sustainable structural retrofit, foundation reinforcement, upgraded drainage for the cliff face, and roof repairs. Total budget is $55,000. The number hung in the air. 55,000 versus 300,000. The discrepancy was not just financial, it was philosophical. One was a responsible, necessary preservation of a structure. The other was a vanity project. "What?" Danica's voice drifted down from the stage. She looked small and frightened, her hands gripping the microphone stand. "What is he talking about? We hired the best team in the county." "You did not hire me," Grant said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "I have never spoken to you. I have been emailing with Violet Herrera for 3 months regarding the preservation of Sea Glass Cove." "That is impossible," Elliot snapped, his facade cracking. "I have the emails right here on my phone. I have been coordinating with your office for weeks." Elliot whipped out his smartphone, his thumbs flying across the screen. He thrust the phone toward Grant. "Look, from Violet, approving the demolition, approving the glass extension." The crowd leaned in. I could see phones coming out of pockets. The sheer drama of the moment was too delicious for the Crescent Bay elite to ignore. They were recording. Grant did not even look at Elliot's phone. He just tapped his tablet again and brought up an image, enlarging it. "This is the email I received yesterday," Grant said, reading aloud. It says, "Please disregard previous specs. We are going with a full remodel. My brother-in-law Elliot will handle the details. It is signed Violet Herrera." "See?" Elliot shouted triumphantly. "She authorized it." "Except," Grant continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "I replied to that email asking for clarification on the permit number, and it bounced back, so I looked closer at the header." He turned the tablet toward me, then toward my father, then toward the guests. "My client, the woman standing right here, uses her professional email address, v.herrera@archstudio.com. The email sending me these demolition orders? It came from v.herrera@archstudio.com, missing the letter T in studio." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd like a wave. "It is a spoofed address," Grant said, looking directly at Elliot. "Someone created a fake email account that looked like hers to approve work she never asked for. And then they used that fake account to try and solicit bids from my competitors, probably to drive the price down or confuse the paper trail." Elliot's face drained of color. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. That must be a typo," Elliot stammered, sweat glistening on his forehead. "A clerical error. My secretary handles the correspondence." "A clerical error does not buy a domain name and set up a server redirect," I said. My voice was calm, but it cut through Elliot's stammering like a scalpel. I stepped around him, reclaiming the space. I looked at my parents, who were staring at me with a mixture of confusion and horror. "There is no clerical error," I said, addressing the room, "and there is no joint family project." I walked over to the AV table near the stage. The technician, a young kid who looked terrified, backed away. I unplugged the HDMI cable connecting Elliot's laptop to the projector. The screen behind us went black, erasing the lie of the Herrera retreat. 6 years ago, I said, turning to face the crowd, Mom and Dad were drowning in debt from the lawsuit against the private practice Dad was part of. They did not tell anyone. They were going to lose the house in the city and the cottage. They needed liquidity, fast. I saw my father flinch. He had prided himself on keeping up appearances. He never wanted anyone to know how close to the edge they had been. "I bought Seaglass Cove from them," I stated clearly. "I bought it at full market appraisal. I paid off their outstanding loans so they could keep their primary residence and retire with dignity. The deed was transferred to my name on November 12th, 6 years ago. It is not family property. It is my home. It is my asset, and I have never, ever given permission for anyone to touch it." The silence that followed was different from before. It was not shocked. It was judgmental. The guests were doing the math. They were looking at Danica and Elliot, the generous couple who had just spent 20 minutes bragging about a $300,000 gift, and realizing that the gift was a sham. They were spending money they did not have, on a house they did not own, using a permit they likely obtained through fraud. "Violet," my mother whispered from her table, her hand over her mouth. You never said." "I never said anything because I did not want to embarrass you," I replied, my voice softening just a fraction. "I let everyone believe it was still yours because I knew how much appearances matter to this family. I paid the taxes. I paid the insurance. I paid for the maintenance. All I asked for was privacy." I turned back to Danica. She was still standing on the stage, but she looked stripped of all her glamour. She looked like a child caught stealing from a purse. "You knew," I said to her. "You knew I bought it. You were there when the notary came to the house." I thought it was just on paper," Danica cried out, her voice shrill. "Mom said it was just a financial thing, to protect assets. I didn't think you actually thought it was yours. We are family, Violet. It is our childhood home." "It is a legal asset," I countered. "And you stood up here, in front of 200 people, and presented a plan to demolish it. You created a fake email address to impersonate me. You tried to trick a contractor into destroying my property starting tomorrow morning." I gestured to Grant. "Mr. Whitmore here is a professional. He spotted the fraud. But what if he hadn't? What if I had not flown in tonight? I would have woken up tomorrow to find bulldozers driving through my living room." Elliot tried to rally one last time. He stepped toward me, his face red with anger and humiliation. "You are blowing this out of proportion," he hissed, low enough that he hoped only I would hear, but in the quiet room, it carried, "We were doing a nice thing for your father. We were going to increase the value of the property by double. You should be thanking us. We were going to put your name on the plaque." "You were going to commit a felony," I said, meeting his gaze without blinking. "Identity theft, fraud, destruction of private property. Do you want me to list the statutes? You are a lawyer, Elliot. You know exactly what happens when you sign a contract as someone else." Elliot's mouth snapped shut. He looked around the room and saw what I saw. The phones were still up. The recording lights were still on. He wasn't just losing an argument, he was losing his reputation in real time. Grant cleared his throat. "So, Ms. Herrera," he said, his tone shifting back to pure business. "Am I to understand that the demolition scheduled for 8 a.m. is canceled?" "Permanently," I said. "And the sustainable retrofit we discussed? The one for $55,000? "Still on the table," Grant said. "We will proceed with that," I said. "On my timeline, with my authorization, and nobody else is allowed on the site." Grant nodded, satisfied. He closed the cover of his tablet with a sharp snap that echoed like a gavel. I will see you at the property tomorrow. Ms. Herrera. Sorry for crashing the party. He turned and walked out, the crowd parting for him with even more deference than before. He was the only person in the room who had told the truth from the start. I stood there, alone in the center of the terrace, surrounded by the wreckage of my sister's vanity project. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I looked at Danica. She was staring at the blank screen, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked at the guests, realizing that her grand gesture had just exposed her as a fraud. I could have left then. I could have walked out with Grant. But I wasn't done. The truth was out. But the accountability had not even started. I looked at my father, the man who had ignored me all night, the man who had let Danica take credit for everything while I quietly paid for his survival. He looked old. He looked tired. And for the first time in my life, he looked at me with something that wasn't dismissal. It was fear. "Violet," Dad said, his voice cracking. Let's go inside. Let's talk about this privately." "No," I said. "We are done hiding things to make you look good, but I will not ruin your night any more than Danica already has." I picked up my purse from the bar stool. "I am going to my hotel tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I expect all 4 of you, Mom, Dad, Danica, Elliot, in the conference room at the Marriott. Bring the paperwork you filed with the city. Bring the fake email logs. Bring everything." I paused, letting the ultimatum sink in. "If you are not there," I said, looking directly at Elliot, "my next meeting will be with the State Bar Association." I turned and walked away. I did not look back, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel the shift in the air. The invisible daughter had just become the most powerful person in the room. The silence that followed my threat to contact the State Bar Association was heavy, thick, and suffocating. It hung over the terrace like a physical weight, pressing down on the shoulders of everyone in my family. The guests, who had been whispering and recording only moments before, were now watching with the intense, morbid curiosity of drivers passing a fatal car wreck. They knew the party was over. Now, they were just waiting to see who would be carried away on a stretcher. My mother was the first to break. She looked small in her expensive evening gown, her hands trembling as she clutched her pearl necklace. She looked between me and Danica, her eyes wide with a frantic, pleading confusion. She could feel the judgment of her friends, the other doctors' wives, the people she had spent 40 years impressing. The facade of the perfect family was crumbling, and she scrambled to find a piece of debris to hide behind. "Violet, please," Mom stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "You have to understand, that year, the year we signed those papers, it was a blur. It was a nightmare." She looked out at the audience, seeking sympathy. "Your father was so sick," she continued, her voice gaining a little more strength as she found her narrative. "The surgery, the complications, the bills were piling up, and the private practice lawsuit was draining us dry. I was out of my mind with worry. When you transferred the money and we signed the deed, honestly, Violet, I just viewed it as a loan, a family arrangement." She turned back to me, her eyes wet. "I forgot we actually sold it to you," she confessed, and the admission hit the room with a dull thud. I truly forgot. In my head, it was still our home. It was still the place we took you girls every summer. I suppose I blocked out the paperwork because the stress was just too much to bear. I stared at her, feeling a cold numbness spread through my chest. She had forgotten. She had taken the money that saved them from bankruptcy, the money I had worked 18-hour days to earn, and she had simply erased the transaction from her memory because it was inconvenient to acknowledge that her daughter had bailed them out. It was easier to pretend the beach house was still theirs by divine right than to admit they had lost it. "And me," my father chimed in, stepping closer to Mom, eager to latch on to her excuse. He rubbed his temples, putting on the performance of the weary, dedicated healer. "You know what those post-op medications were like, Violet? I was on heavy painkillers for months. I signed whatever papers the lawyers put in front of me. I trusted you. I assumed we were just shifting assets around to protect the estate. I never thought my own daughter would hold a piece of paper over my head like a weapon. I am not holding it like a weapon, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through his self-pity. I am holding it like a deed, because that is what it is. But we did not know, Danica shrieked. She had abandoned the microphone and was now standing at the edge of the stage, her face blotchy and red. The poise she had displayed 20 minutes ago was entirely gone. I swear, Violet, Mom and Dad told me the house was just sitting there. They said it needed love. I thought I was doing something good. I thought I was saving our childhood. She looked at the guests, begging for validation. I just wanted to make a sanctuary for the family, she sobbed. How can you stand there and make me look like a criminal when all I wanted was to give Dad a nice place to retire? It was a compelling performance. For a second, I saw a few heads in the crowd nod. They wanted to believe her. They wanted to believe that this was all just a tragic misunderstanding between a loving sister and a cold, legalistic one. Then Elliot stepped in, and he overplayed their hand. He adjusted his cuffs, his eyes darting around, calculating the angles. He realized that pleading ignorance was not enough for a lawyer. He needed a systemic excuse. Look, let's be reasonable, Elliot said, his voice dropping to a conciliatory, man-to-man tone that made my skin crawl. The county records in this district are notorious for being slow to update. When I pulled the preliminary title report, it was ambiguous. Anyone could have made that mistake. The chain of title looked fluid. I assumed the transfer to Violet was a trust holding, not a full sale. It is a common structure in estate planning. I was acting on the assumption that the beneficial interest still lay with Robert and Elena. He spread his hands, smiling at the crowd. It is a technicality, Elliot insisted. A misunderstanding of complex real estate law. We can sort this out without all the drama. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. I watched the guests digest this. A few of them looked confused by the legal jargon, perhaps ready to accept that this was just a boring paperwork error. Then I stepped forward and dismantled him. A technicality, I repeated, my voice flat and hard. Okay, Elliot, let's assume you are right. Let's assume Mom and Dad genuinely forgot they sold the house. Let's assume Danica truly thought it was still theirs. Let's even assume that you, a practicing attorney, somehow cannot read a clear title deed that has been recorded for 6 years. I took a breath, locking eyes with him. If you thought the house belonged to Mom and Dad, I asked, why did you need my permission to renovate it? Elliot froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. If you truly believed the property was owned by Robert and Elena Herrera, I continued, raising my voice so every person on the terrace could hear, you would have had them sign the permit applications, you would have had them authorize the contractor, but you didn't. I turned to Grant Whitmore, who was watching the scene with his arms crossed, his face like granite. Mr. Whitmore, I said, who did the email come from? The one authorizing the work? It came from a Violet Herrera, Grant said, his voice gruff and loud. Specifically, it claimed to be the owner. I turned back to the family, my gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. And that is the hole in your story, I said. If you thought it was Mom and Dad's house, you would not have needed to impersonate me. The only reason to create a fake email address in my name, the only reason to forge my digital signature, is because you knew exactly who owned that house. You knew it was mine. You knew I would never agree to destroy it, so you tried to bypass me. The logic was inescapable. It stripped away the misunderstanding defense and left only cold, calculated fraud. Danica stopped crying. She stared at Elliot, horror dawning on her face as she realized the implication. Mom and Dad looked at their son-in-law, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. They might have been negligent, but Elliot had been active. Grant Whitmore stepped forward, delivering the final blow. If I had started work tomorrow, Grant said, looking directly at my father, and if I had touched a single beam on that house based on fraudulent authorization, your family would be facing a lawsuit that would make your medical malpractice insurance look like pocket change. We are talking about criminal trespassing and malicious destruction of property. I do not touch jobs like that. and I do not work with people who try to trick me into committing crimes. The atmosphere in the Silver Dunes Country Club had transformed completely. The festive, golden glow of the retirement party was gone, replaced by a stark, harsh reality. The guests were no longer charmed. They were embarrassed. I saw Mrs. Gable grab her purse and whisper something to her husband. He nodded, and they began to back away toward the exit. It started a chain reaction. People began checking their watches, feigning sudden emergencies. The waiters, sensing the shift, stopped circulating with champagne and began quietly clearing tables, trying to become invisible. "This is ridiculous," my father said, trying to laugh, but the sound was hollow and desperate. "Everyone, please, it is just a family squabble. We will sort this out. Let's cut the cake." But nobody wanted cake. They wanted to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Herrera family. "I think we should go," I heard the chief of surgery say to his wife. "I have an early rounds tomorrow." "Me too," another guest muttered. The exodus was swift and brutal. Within minutes, the terrace was half empty. The remaining guests were clustered in tight knots, whispering, their eyes darting toward the stage where Danica and Elliot stood like statues in the ruins of their own ego. I stood there, watching the destruction of my father's reputation. Part of me, the part that had been ignored and minimized for 36 years, felt a dark, savage satisfaction. They had tried to erase me, and in doing so, they had erased themselves. But another part of me, the pragmatic architect, knew that a total collapse was not the goal. If I pushed too hard right now, if I let this turn into a screaming match in front of the remaining stragglers, it would become a spectacle that I could never control. I did not want to destroy my father's entire legacy. I just wanted my property back. I wanted boundaries. I saw my father grab a waiter's arm, demanding a fresh drink, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Mom was sitting in her chair, staring at the tablecloth, looking like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. It was time to end the scene. "We are not doing this here," I said, lowering my voice but keeping it firm. "I am not going to scream at you in front of your colleagues. Dad, you have been humiliated enough for one night." I walked over to the table where I had left my purse. I picked it up. Slinging the strap over my shoulder, I felt light, unburdened. The secret I had kept for 6 years was out, and the truth was a shield they could not penetrate. "Go home," I told them. "Do not go to the beach house. Do not even drive past it. Go to your house, sleep it off, and talk to your lawyer." I looked at Elliot, who was now furiously typing on his phone, likely trying to delete evidence. 10 o'clock tomorrow," I repeated. "Marriott Conference Room B. If you are 5 minutes late, or if you try to spin this into another lie, I am filing the police report for identity theft." "Violet, you cannot be serious," Danica whispered, her voice trembling. "We are your family." "That is the only reason you are not in handcuffs right now," I replied. I nodded to Grant, who gave me a sharp, respectful salute with 2 fingers before turning to leave. I followed him, walking through the path that the remaining guests cleared for me. They looked at me differently now. There was no pity in their eyes, no dismissal. There was fear, and there was respect. I walked out of the country club and into the cool night air of Crescent Bay. The sound of the ocean was louder here, crashing against the cliffs in the distance. It was the sound of my home, my house. I got into my rental car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just took a deep breath, inhaling the salt air, and started the engine. The slow burn was over. The explosion had happened. Now, it was time to sift through the ashes and decide what, if anything, was worth saving. The door to my hotel room clicked shut, sealing out the hallway noise and leaving me in a silence that felt heavy and electric. I leaned back against the wood, closing my eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My body was vibrating, a mix of adrenaline and the phantom bass of the party music that was likely still playing to an empty terrace 3 miles away. I walked over to the desk and tossed my purse down. My phone, which I had silenced during the confrontation, lit up. Then it lit up again, and again. It buzzed against the hard surface of the desk like an angry insect. I picked it up and watched the notifications cascade down the screen. They were all from Danica. Violet, please pick up. Mom is hyperventilating. You didn't have to do that in front of everyone. We need to talk. Now. Elliot is calling his firm. You are making a huge mistake. I am sorry, okay? Is that what you want? I am sorry. But seriously, Violet, how could you embarrass Dad like that? I scrolled through the erratic stream of consciousness. It was a perfect case study in the stages of grief, cycling rapidly between denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, all within the span of 15 minutes. There was no genuine remorse in those blue bubbles. There was only panic. She was not sorry for what she did. She was sorry the audience had seen behind the curtain. The tone shifted from pleading to accusing so fast it made me dizzy. 1 second she was the victim, the misunderstood sister trying to do a good deed. The next, she was the scold, reprimanding me for not playing my role as the silent, grateful prop. I tossed the phone onto the bed and rubbed my face. The makeup I had carefully applied 3 hours ago felt heavy and mask-like. I went to the bathroom, washed it all off, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was pale, her eyes dark, but there was a set to her jaw that I hadn't seen in years. It was the face I wore when I walked into a meeting with a difficult contractor who thought he could overcharge me because I was a woman. It was my work face, and for the first time, I was wearing it for my family. My phone started ringing again, a video call request. I braced myself for another round of Danica's hysterics, but when I looked at the screen, my shoulders instantly dropped. It was Theo. I accepted the call and propped the phone up against the ice bucket. Theo's face filled the screen, pixelated but comforting. He was sitting in our living room back in Maine, a mug of tea in his hand, the morning light just starting to break over the harbor behind him. The time difference meant he was waking up just as my nightmare evening was ending. "Hey," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "You look like you just survived a war zone. How did the party go?" "It did not go," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I blew it up. Theo, I nuked it." I told him everything. I told him about the slideshow, the $300,000 renovation they claimed to be paying for, the fake email address, and Grant Whitmore walking in like an avenging angel in work boots. Theo listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from amusement to shock, and finally to a cold, hard anger. "They forged your signature?" he asked, putting his mug down. "Violet, that is not family drama. That is a felony." "I know," I said, picking at a loose thread on the bedspread. "I told them I would go to the Bar Association if they did not meet me tomorrow." "Good," Theo said firmly. "Do not back down. Listen to me, Vi. Do not let them gaslight you into thinking you overreacted. You need to document everything, right now, while it is fresh. Screenshot every text Danica sent you tonight. Download the emails Grant showed you. Save it all to the cloud." "I will," I promised. "I mean it," he pressed. "They are going to wake up tomorrow and try to rewrite history. They will say they were confused, or that you gave verbal permission, or that Grant is lying. You need hard evidence." We talked for another 10 minutes. He offered to fly out, but I told him no. This was something I had to finish alone. When we hung up, the silence returned, but it felt less lonely. I did as he said. I sat at the small hotel desk and opened my laptop. I started capturing the text messages, saving them into a folder I named simply The Beach House. As I worked, my mind drifted back, not to the party, but to the years leading up to it. I thought about my college graduation. I had graduated summa cum laude from architecture school, a grueling 5-year program. At the celebratory dinner, my mother had spent 20 minutes talking about how Danica had just been promoted to assistant manager at a boutique that sold scented candles. They had toasted Danica's business acumen, while my degree sat in a tube on the floor, unnoticed. I thought about the time I landed my first cover on a regional design magazine. I had mailed a copy home, proud and excited, when I visited for Christmas 3 months later. I found the magazine in the recycling bin, unread, but on the fridge, held up by a magnet, was a clipping from the local paper listing Elliot as a donor to the Rotary Club. I realized with a sickening clarity that I had trained them to treat me this way, by never complaining, by smiling and nodding, by hiding the magnitude of my success to avoid making Danica feel insecure. I had given them permission to view me as a non-entity. I had made myself small so they could feel big, and because I was small in their eyes, they assumed I was also weak. They assumed I was stupid enough to not notice a demolition crew at my own house. They assumed I was passive enough to let them steal a property worth over $1 million because family shares. A chime from my laptop snapped me back to the present. It was an email from Grant Whitmore. The subject line was simply, documentation. I opened it. Grant had been busy. He hadn't just gone home to sleep. He had compiled a dossier. Ms. Herrera. Per our discussion, attached is the full email chain between myself and the address vherrera@archstudio.com. My IT guy took a look at the headers. The IP address that created the fake domain originates from a residential internet service provider in Crescent Bay. Specifically, it traces back to a router registered to an Elliot Davis. Also attached is the PDF of the permit application they filed with the county. I pulled it from the public portal tonight. They listed you as the applicant, but used Elliot's office phone number as the contact. See you at the site whenever you are ready. I am not touching a hammer until you say go. Best, Grant. I stared at the screen. Grant, a man I had met for 5 minutes, had shown me more respect and loyalty in one evening than my family had in a decade. The evidence was damning. The IP address was the nail in the coffin. Elliot hadn't just made a mistake. He had set up a fraudulent domain name. That took time. That took effort. That was calculated malice disguised as brotherly help. And Danica? She had to know. Maybe she didn't know the technical details of how Elliot spoofed the email, but she knew the plan. She knew the house was mine, but she needed the dopamine hit of being the benevolent heiress. I thought about Danica's Instagram feed. It was a curated shrine to a life that didn't really exist. Perfect angles, filtered sunsets, captions about blessed life and family first. This renovation project was supposed to be her masterpiece. She probably already had the posts drafted. So happy to gift this to Mom and Dad. Demolition Day. Building dreams. She was willing to bulldoze my sanctuary just to get likes from strangers. I felt the last vestige of guilt evaporate. I wasn't the villain here. I was the bank, the doormat, and the scapegoat. And I was resigning from all 3 positions effective immediately. I spent the next 2 hours preparing. I did not sleep. I connected my laptop to the hotel's business center printer downstairs and printed 3 copies of everything. The email logs, the fake permit application, the deed to the house, which I had digitized on my cloud drive, the text messages Danica had sent me tonight, admitting guilt in her chaotic way. I organized the papers into 4 neat stacks on the desk, 1 for Mom, 1 for Dad, 1 for Danica, 1 for Elliot. I formulated my demands. I wrote them down on a legal pad, my handwriting sharp and angular. I looked at the list. It was harsh. It was cold. It was necessary. 1. Immediate withdrawal of all permits. 2. A formal written admission of the unauthorized use of my name, notarized, to protect me from future liability. 3. Repayment of any deposits they had taken or spent using the house as collateral. 4. A donation. The last point was a sudden inspiration. If they wanted to spend money to look good, I would make sure they spent it on something that actually helped people, not their own egos. By the time I finished, it was 3 a.m. The adrenaline had faded into a dull, throbbing exhaustion, but my mind was crystal clear. I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. The streetlights of Crescent Bay cast long, orange shadows on the pavement. Somewhere out there, in their manicured suburban homes, my family was likely not sleeping either. They were probably spiraling, trying to come up with a story that would make this all go away. They were probably telling themselves that I would calm down by morning. that Violet always calmed down, that Violet always forgave. They were preparing for the sister they knew, the sister who wanted to be liked. But that sister had stayed at the party. The woman waiting for them in the conference room tomorrow was the CEO of her own life. I let the curtain fall back into place. I checked the alarm on my phone. Set for 7 a.m., I needed to shower, dress in my sharpest blazer, and drink 2 cups of black coffee before the meeting. I lay down on the bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin. For the first time in years, I did not feel the crushing anxiety of trying to fit into a shape that was too small for me. I felt the calm of someone who finally held the blueprints. I closed my eyes. I was ready. Let them come. Let them try to spin it. I had the truth in black and white, and for once, I was not afraid to use it. Conference Room B at the Marriott was a windowless box of beige walls and fluorescent lighting, chilled to a temperature that felt designed to preserve biological samples. I sat at the head of the mahogany veneer table, my spine not touching the back of the chair. I was wearing a charcoal blazer, a white silk blouse, and the kind of expression I usually reserved for contractors who tried to tell me that load-bearing walls were optional. On the table in front of me sat 4 neat stacks of paper, aligned with the precision of a drafted floor plan. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. They filed in like a funeral procession. My father went first, looking gray and shrunken without the adrenaline of the party to prop him up. My mother followed, her eyes swollen behind sunglasses she did not remove. Danica looked like she had slept in her makeup. There were smudges of mascara beneath her eyes, and her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun. Elliot brought up the rear, carrying his leather briefcase like a shield, but his shoulders were slumped. They hesitated at the door, surprised to see me already seated, composed, with the room fully prepped. I did not stand up. I did not smile. I simply gestured to the 4 empty chairs. "Sit down," I said. It was not a request. They took their seats in silence. The air in the room was thick with unsaid apologies and defensive maneuvering. I waited until the door clicked shut and the heavy silence settled over us. "In front of you is a packet," I began, my voice level and cool. "Do not speak, do not apologize, do not try to explain, just read it, every page." Elliot reached for his stack, his hand shaking slightly. Danica stared at hers as if it were a bomb. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to turn the pages. The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper and the hum of the air conditioning. I watched their faces. I saw my father squint at the deed to the house, seeing the date of transfer clearly for the first time in 6 years. I saw my mother gasp softly when she saw the permit application with the forged signature. But it was when they reached the email logs, the ones Grant had sent me regarding the fake domain name, that the atmosphere shifted from awkward to terrified. Elliot stopped reading. He closed his eyes for a second, knowing he had been caught in a lie that no amount of legal jargon could spin. Danica looked at the email chain, her lips moving as she read the words sent in my name, authorizing the destruction of my own home. "This," my father started, his voice raspy. "This says Elliot set up the website?" "Keep reading, Dad," I said. "The IP trace is on the last page." When they had finished, I folded my hands on the table. "So," I said, "here is how this works. We are not going to talk about feelings today. I do not want to hear about how much you love me, or how this was all a big misunderstanding, or how stressful the party planning was. We are going to talk about facts. We are going to talk about the law, and we are going to talk about consequences." Elliot straightened his tie, his lawyer instinct kicking in despite the evidence against him. He cleared his throat, putting on his professional mask. "Violet, look," he began, his tone patronizingly calm. "I appreciate you compiling this, but you are looking at this through a very narrow lens. In the legal world, intent matters. We can argue that there was implied consent given the familial relationship and—" "Stop," I said. The word cracked like a whip. "I am just trying to provide context," Elliot pressed, leaning forward. "If you try to take this to a civil court, Any judge is going to see a family dispute, not a criminal case. You are overreacting to a— Elliot, I said, leaning forward to match his posture. If you were anyone else, if you were a stranger, a neighbor, or a rival developer, I would not be sitting in this hotel room. I would have been at the police station last night filing a report for identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery. The only reason you are not currently explaining that IP address to a detective is because you married my sister. That is the only protection you have right now. Do not test its durability. Elliot's mouth snapped shut. He looked at the paperwork again, then at me. He realized I wasn't bluffing. He realized that I knew exactly what those statutes carried in terms of prison time and disbarment. Danica let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. I just wanted to do something good, she wailed, her voice echoing in the small room. Why are you being so cruel? It was supposed to be a surprise, a gift for Dad. I never wanted to hurt you. Violet, I swear on my kids' lives, I didn't mean to hurt you. She looked up, her eyes pleading, waiting for me to soften. This was the dynamic we had played out for 30 years. Danica would screw up. She would cry. She would claim her heart was in the right place, and I would comfort her. Not today. I believe you, I said. Danica blinked, sniffing. You do? I believe you did not intend to hurt me, I said, because to intend to hurt me, you would have to consider me a person first. You didn't do that. You didn't think about me at all. I pointed to the email log in front of her. You said you didn't mean to harm me, yet you stood by while your husband created a fake identity in my name. You planned a demolition of a house you knew I owned. You didn't ask me because you knew I would say no. That is not a surprise. Danica, that is theft. You felt entitled to my property because you don't respect my ownership of it. You don't respect me. My mother reached out to touch Danica's arm, but she was looking at me. For the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. It wasn't the vague, distracted affection she usually offered. It was shock. She was looking at me and realizing she didn't know the woman sitting at the head of the table. She was seeing the CEO, the architect, the woman who managed millions of dollars in assets, not the quiet girl who drew in her sketchbook. Violet, my father said, his voice low. We handled this poorly. I admit that. But surely, these terms— He gestured to the papers. You are talking about fraud, about crimes. These are heavy words to use at a family table. They are heavy because the actions were heavy, Dad, I replied. You want to talk about the reality? Here is the reality. I started counting off on my fingers. 1. Identity theft, creating a digital persona to impersonate another individual for financial gain or to authorize contracts. That is a federal crime. I raised a second finger. 2. Filing false documents with a government agency. The permit application lists me as the applicant. I did not sign it. That is perjury and falsification of public records. I raised a third finger. 3. Conspiracy to commit property damage. If Grant hadn't been an honest man, if he had taken that bulldozer to my house today, you would all be liable for every cent of the damage, plus punitive damages. I lowered my hand and looked at each of them in turn. I am not using heavy words to be dramatic. I am using the correct terminology for what you did. You didn't just borrow a sweater without asking. You tried to hijack a real estate asset. The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a roar in the quiet. My parents looked physically ill. They had spent their lives building a reputation in Crescent Bay as the perfect, upstanding family. Now, they were staring at the evidence that their golden couple, Danica and Elliot, were capable of deceit that bordered on sociopathic. I have a life in Maine, I said, my voice softer now but no less firm. I have a business. I have a partner. I have a reputation. I do not have time to babysit grown adults who think the law doesn't apply to them because they are family. So here is the deal. I tapped the table with my index finger. I am giving you a choice. We can handle this in this room, privately. We can fix the paperwork, correct the record, and settle the damages without the police or the press ever knowing. Or If you think I am being unfair, if you think I am being cruel, we can leave right now and let the legal system handle it. A judge won't care that it was meant to be a retirement gift. A judge will only care about the signatures. I leaned back in my chair. So, which conversation do you want to have? The family one or the legal one? Danica looked at Elliot. Elliot looked at the table. My father looked at the wall, unable to meet my eyes. The family one, Elliot whispered. His arrogance was gone, stripped away by the sheer weight of the paper trail in front of him. We want the family conversation. Good choice, I said. I opened the folder that lay beneath my hands, the one containing the list of demands I had drafted at 3 a.m. Then let's look at the conditions, I said. And be clear on one thing. These are not requests. These are requirements. If you deviate from them by a single inch, I hand this entire file to the state attorney. The shift in the room was palpable. The power dynamic that had defined our family for decades, Danica the star, me the spectator, parents the rulers, me the subject, had been inverted. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was the judge, and they were the defendants hoping for a plea deal. Read the first page, I commanded. And for the first time in my life, they did exactly what I told them to do. The air in the conference room was still, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm has passed, but before the damage has been fully assessed. My family sat before me, stripped of their social armor, waiting for the terms of their surrender. Item 1, I said, pointing to the first bullet point on the document in front of them. The permits. By the end of business today, Elliot, you will go to the county planning office. You will withdraw the application for the Herrera retreat. You will file a formal correction stating that the application contained erroneous ownership information. Elliot opened his mouth, likely to suggest a more discreet way to handle it, but I cut him off with a look. You will not blame it on a clerk, I continued. You will not blame it on a system glitch. You will state that you, as the representative, filed incorrect data. I want a stamped copy of that withdrawal emailed to me by 5 o'clock. If the county calls me next week asking why there are still active demolition orders on my property, I am forwarding the police report. Elliot nodded, his face pale. Understood. I will handle it personally. Good, I said. Item 2, the apology. I looked at my parents, then at Danica. I do not need a Hallmark card. I do not need flowers. What I need is for the public record to be clean. You will write a formal letter to the Silver Dunes Country Club board and to the guests who were present last night. You will clarify that the project presented was unauthorized and that the property belongs solely to me. You do not have to go into the details of the fraud. I will spare you that humiliation. But you will take ownership of the misunderstanding. You will make it clear that I am not the ungrateful daughter who ruined the party, but the rightful owner protecting her home. My mother winced. Admitting a mistake to her social circle was a fate worse than death for her. But she looked at the alternative, a criminal investigation involving her son-in-law, and nodded weakly. We will do it, Violet, Dad said, his voice heavy. We will set the record straight. Item 3, I said, moving to the financial section. The money. Danica looked up, sniffing. We already spent $5,000 on the architectural renderings and the deposit for the contractor. I don't care about your sunk costs, I said coldly. That is the price of your ego. I am talking about restitution. I locked eyes with Elliot. You were ready to spend $300,000 on a renovation to make yourself look like a local hero. You wanted everyone to think you were the generous benefactor of Crescent Bay. Well, now you are going to be a benefactor for real, but without the glory. I slid a brochure across the table. It was for the Crescent Bay Housing Trust, a local nonprofit that helped low-income families secure affordable housing in the area. You and Danica will donate $60,000 to this trust, I stated. That is 20% of the budget you were so eager to burn on my house. You will make the donation in my name, Violet Herrera. But here is the catch. You will do it anonymously, no press release, no photo op with the director, No plaque with your names on it. 60,000? Elliot choked. Violet, that is a lot of liquidity. It is a lot less than the legal fees you would pay to defend a fraud charge, I countered. And frankly, I don't need your money. My firm had a net profit of $1.2 million last year. I can pay for my own renovations. What I want is for you to understand the weight of money. You treat it like a prop. I want you to feel it leaving your bank account without getting any applause in return. That is the only way you will learn. Elliot looked at Danica. She gave a small, defeated nod. They knew I had them cornered. Fine, Elliot muttered. We will arrange the transfer. Item 4, I said, turning my gaze to my parents. My voice softened, losing some of its courtroom edge but retaining its firmness. This one is for you, Mom and Dad. They looked up, bracing themselves for another financial penalty. I don't want your money, I said. I want your attention, real attention. I pulled a glossy bound document from my bag and placed it on the table. It was the annual report of my architectural firm, Herrera & Commoby. It featured photos of the cliffside villas I had designed, the sustainable community centers I had built, and the awards I had won in New England. For 10 years, you have treated my career like a hobby, I said. You tell people I do houses up north. You have never asked me a single specific question about my work. You don't know the name of my business partner. You don't know what my signature style is. My mother looked down at her hands, shame coloring her cheeks. I want you to read this, I said, tapping the report. Cover to cover. I want you to understand who I am outside of this family dynamic. And from now on, once a month, we are going to have a call, a real call, not 5 minutes of you telling me about Danica's kids and then hanging up. I want you to ask me about my life, and I want you to actually listen to the answer. We can do that, Dad said, reaching out to touch the cover of the report. He opened it to the first page, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the photo of a glass-walled library I had designed in Bar Harbor. I didn't know you did commercial work, Vi. There is a lot you don't know, I said, because you never asked. I turned finally to Danica. She was quiet now, the hysterics having drained away, leaving her looking small and tired. Why? I asked her. Just tell me why. You have the husband, the kids, the house in the suburbs, the approval of Mom and Dad. Why did you need to take my house too? Danica took a shaky breath. She picked up a napkin and twisted it in her fingers. Because you left, she whispered. I frowned. What? You left, she repeated, her voice gaining a little strength. You got out. You went to Maine. You built this mystery life. And every time you came back, even though you were quiet, you seemed so free. You didn't have to deal with Mom's constant criticism about how the house looked. You didn't have the pressure of Dad's legacy hanging over you every day. She looked up at me, her eyes red. I stayed. I did everything right. I married the lawyer. I had the grandsons. I ran the charity auctions. But I always felt like I was just maintaining their image. And I was terrified that one day, you would come back with your big career and everyone would realize that I am just the one who stayed behind, the one who peaked in high school. She wiped her nose. The beach house project, it was supposed to be my thing, my way of showing everyone that I could do something big too, that I could add value. If I fixed up the family house, I would be the hero. I would be the one who saved the legacy. I needed that win. Violet, I needed to feel like I was more than just Danica the mom. I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in years, I saw the insecurity that drove the narcissism. I saw the exhaustion behind the perfect smile. She was running on a treadmill of validation, terrified that if she stopped, she would disappear. You didn't have to steal my house to prove you have value, I said quietly. And you certainly didn't have to erase me to make yourself visible. I know, she sobbed. I was just jealous. I have always been jealous of you. Violet, you don't need their applause. I survive on it. The confession hung in the room. It was raw and ugly, but it was the most honest thing she had said in decades. I don't need you to lose, Danica, I said. I am not interested in a competition. I don't care if you are the favorite. I don't care if you are the star. You can have the spotlight. Keep it. I leaned forward, my voice steely. But do not ever use me as a stepping stone again. Do not ever mistake my silence for absence. I exist. I am successful. And I am done being the invisible prop in your stage play. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to understand me. But you will respect me. Danica nodded, tears streaming down her face again, but this time they seemed less performative. I will, she whispered. I promise. I looked around the table. My father was reading my annual report. Actually reading it. His brow furrowed in concentration. My mother was looking at me with a mix of fear and newfound regard. Elliot was scribbling notes on a legal pad, looking like a man who had just narrowly avoided a landmine. Okay, I said, closing the folder in front of me. Then we have an agreement. I stood up. They all looked up at me, staying seated. The shift in gravity was permanent. Elliot, I expect that email by 5. Mom, Dad, I will wait for your call next week. Danica, just go home and hug your kids. You have a good life. Stop trying to make it look perfect and just enjoy it. I picked up my bag. I am going to the beach house. Grant is meeting me there to start the real work. Do not come by unless you are invited. I walked to the door. As I reached for the handle, my father spoke. Violet? I turned back. He was holding the annual report open to a page showing a complex cantilevered deck I had engineered. This structure, he said, pointing to the photo. The stress loads on that cliff. How did you manage the erosion control? It was a specific question. A technical question, a question that acknowledged my expertise. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It is a system of deep-rooted pilings and native vegetation. Dad, I said. Read page 42. It explains the whole engineering process. He nodded, looking back down at the page with genuine interest. I will. It looks impressive, honey. Thanks, Dad, I said. I walked out of the conference room and down the hall. My heels clicked on the tile floor. A steady, rhythmic sound. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel elated. I felt something better. I felt seen, and more importantly, I felt finished. The drama was over. Now, I could go build something real. The sound of a circular saw ripping through old timber became the new soundtrack of my life at Seaglass Cove. Unlike the chaotic, destructive noise of the demolition crew Elliot had ordered, this sound was precise. It was surgical. It was the sound of healing. For the next 3 weeks, I did not just visit the site. I inhabited it. I traded my blazers for steel-toed boots and heavy denim. I was not just the client writing the checks. I was the architect of record when the foreman, a grueling man named Henderson who had worked the coast for 40 years, tried to suggest a shortcut on the joist hangers. I didn't politely defer. I pulled up the structural load calculations on my iPad and walked him through the math until he nodded, tipped his hard hat, and did it my way. The crew stopped calling me Miss Herrera and started calling me Boss. The shift in title felt better than any award I had ever won. Grant Whitmore was there every day, his presence a steady, grounding force. We fell into an easy rhythm. We were not building the Herrera retreat with its glass boxes and vanity decks. We were fortifying a fortress. We stripped the siding to install high-density insulation that would cut energy costs by 40%. We reinforced the roof trusses with hurricane clips to withstand the increasing ferocity of the winter storms. We installed a solar array, not the ugly bolt-on kind, but sleek, integrated panels that hugged the roofline like a second skin. One afternoon, while we were inspecting the new triple-paned windows that faced the ocean, Grant handed me a thermos of coffee. You know, he said, looking out at the gray water, I have seen a lot of people try to fix houses to fix their marriages, or their egos. It never works. The house stands, but the people inside crumble. I took the coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my gloves. And what am I doing, Grant? You are putting steel in the spine, he said, tapping a structural beam. both the house's and yours." He leaned against the frame, watching the crew install the flashing. "My brother and I went into business together 20 years ago." Grant continued. "He was the charmer, I was the hammer. He started promising clients things we couldn't build just to be the good guy. Cost us a fortune. I had to fire him. My own brother. Mom didn't speak to me for a year." I looked at him, surprised by the confession. That must have been hard. "It was hell," Grant admitted. "But if I hadn't drawn that line, he would have bankrupted us both. Family is like water. Violet, it is essential. But if you don't build a container for it, it will flood your whole house and rot the foundation. You have to waterproof your life." His words stuck with me. Waterproofing my life. That was exactly what I had failed to do for 36 years. I had let their needs, their expectations, and their narratives seep into my walls until I was molding from the inside out. That night, back at my hotel, I opened my laptop. Usually, I kept my professional social media strictly curated with finished, glossy photos. But I felt a sudden urge to claim the process. I uploaded a photo of myself standing on the roof, windblown and messy, pointing at the new solar integration. I captioned it, "Reclaiming the Structure. Sustainable retrofit in progress at my personal residence in Crescent Bay. No glass boxes here. Just resilience." I posted it. By morning, the post had more engagement than anything I had ever shared. Colleagues from Boston and New York commented on the technical specs. A furious debate broke out in the comments about the best sealant for salt air, which I moderated with glee. Then, an email popped up. It was from an editor at Coastal Living magazine. She had seen the post and wanted to interview me about the intersection of heritage preservation and modern sustainability. I read the email twice. For years, I had kept my work quiet to avoid making Danica feel small. I had dimmed my light so hers could flicker a little brighter. I realized now that my silence hadn't protected anyone. It had only created a vacuum that Elliot and Danica felt entitled to fill with their lies. By stepping into the light, I wasn't just boosting my career, I was making it impossible for them to ever erase me again. As the renovation neared its structural completion, the dynamic with my parents began to shift in strange, jerky movements. It started with a text from my father. "Saw the invoice for the solar inverters. Why did we go with the microinverters instead of the string system? Just curious." I called him. I expected him to complain about the cost, even though I was paying for it. Instead, he listened as I explained how the partial shading from the cypress tree would kill the efficiency of a string system, whereas microinverters allowed each panel to operate independently. "That makes sense," he said. There was a pause. "I read about that in your annual report. The project you did in Vermont used the same logic, right?" I froze. He had actually read it. He wasn't just skimming the pictures. He was retaining the information. "Yes, Dad," I said, my voice catching slightly. "That is exactly right." "Smart," he said. "That is really smart. Vi." 2 days later, my mother called. She didn't talk about Danica's latest PTA drama. She asked me about the paint color I was choosing for the exterior. When I told her I was restoring the original cedar shake look rather than painting it, she sighed. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I always hated that idea Elliot had of painting it stark white. It would have looked like a dentist's office. The cedar it is how it is supposed to be." "I am glad you think so, Mom," I said. "We drove by yesterday," she admitted hesitantly. "Just on the road. We didn't stop. It looks strong. It looks like it is going to be there for a long time." "That is the point," I said. The biggest test, however, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the newly rebuilt deck, reviewing the final punch list with Grant. My phone buzzed. It was Danica. I hadn't spoken to her since the conference room showdown. I braced myself for a guilt trip or a passive-aggressive remark about the donation she had been forced to make. Instead, a photo appeared. It was a picture of her 2 sons, Leo and Sam, sitting in their backyard with sad faces, holding a deflated beach ball. Then the text, The boys are asking why we haven't gone to the beach house this summer. I told them Aunt Violet is fixing it so it is safe. They want to know if they can come see the big trucks. I stared at the screen. The old Violet would have read between the lines and seen manipulation, using the kids as human shields to force a reconciliation. But looking at the text now, I saw something else. I saw a sister who was terrified of rejection, trying to find a safe way to knock on the door. A second text appeared. I won't come in if you don't want me to. I can just drop them at the gate. I want them to know you. That was the line that broke me. I want them to know you, not, I want them to use your house, not, I want a free vacation. I looked up at Grant. He was watching me, raising an eyebrow. Problem? He asked. My sister wants to bring the nephews over, I said. And? And I am trying to figure out if that is a leak in my waterproofing, I replied. Grant chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. A door isn't a leak, Violet. A door is something you choose to open, as long as you have the key, and you can lock it again when you need to. It is just a door. I looked back at the phone. I typed slowly. Saturday at 2 o'clock. The heavy machinery will be gone, so it is safe. You can come in. Danica, but tell Elliot he is not welcome yet. I am not ready for that. The response was immediate. Understood. Just me and the boys. Thank you. Violet, really. Saturday came with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze off the Pacific. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach as Danica's SUV pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the panic I used to feel, the fear of being judged. It was the anxiety of a host wanting her space to be respected. When Danica stepped out of the car, she looked different. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, not the curated resort wear she usually sported. She looked tired, but real. The boys scrambled out, screaming with delight when they saw the ocean. Aunt Vi! Leo yelled, running toward me. I caught him, swinging him around. He smelled like sunscreen and grape juice. Whoa, careful, I laughed. Do not run on the new decking with sandy shoes. Danica hung back by the car, holding a Tupperware container. She looked at the house, the clean lines, the restored cedar, the solar panels glinting in the sun. It was nothing like the palace she and Elliot had designed. It was modest, grounded, and beautiful. It looks amazing, she said, walking up the steps. It looks like us, but better. It looks like me, I corrected gently. Right, she said, looking down. It looks like you. She handed me the Tupperware. I made those lemon bars you like, the ones with the extra zest. I didn't buy them. I made them. It was a small thing, a batch of cookies, but for Danica, who outsourced everything to maintain her image of perfection. Spending 2 hours in a kitchen covered in flour was a significant offering. Thanks, I said, taking the container. Come on inside. Let me show you the kitchen. I kept the layout, but I upgraded the appliances. We spent the afternoon watching the boys play on the shore. We didn't talk about the party. We didn't talk about the money or the fraud. We talked about the kids. We talked about the weather. We talked about the fact that Mom was driving Dad crazy with her new obsession with pickleball. It was mundane. It was simple. And it was the most comfortable I had ever felt with my sister. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Danica called the boys to pack up. Thanks for letting us come, she said, buckling Sam into his car seat. I know we have a long way to go. We do, I agreed, leaning against the doorframe of her car. But the donation to the housing trust? I got the letter from the director. He said it is going to help 3 families keep their homes this winter. Danica paused. Yeah, Elliot was furious about the money, but honestly, when I signed the check, I felt good, like actually good, not likes on Instagram good. She looked at me, a wry smile touching her lips. Maybe you are onto something with this whole substance over style thing. Maybe, I smiled. I watched her drive away, the dust settling on the driveway. I walked back up the steps to my deck. The house was quiet. The construction crew was gone for the weekend. The only sound was the ocean and the wind humming through the new solar array. I ran my hand along the railing Grant and I had installed. It was solid. It didn't wobble. I had opened the door, and I had let my family in. But as I turned the deadbolt and heard the heavy, reassuring thud of the lock sliding into place, I knew that Grant was right. I had the key. The house was mine. And for the first time in my life, so was I. The invitation I sent was specific. Sunday at 4 o'clock, dinner would be served at 6, and regarding the guest list, there was a strict caveat attached to Elliot's name. He was only welcome to cross the threshold if he brought the file containing the stamped, notarized copies of the retracted permits and the formal apology letter sent to the county planning board. I stood in the entryway of Seaglass Cove, checking the alignment of the new runner rug for the third time. The house smelled of roasted garlic, lemon, and the fresh, cedar scent of the new timber we had installed. It did not smell like a construction zone anymore. It smelled like a home. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath. This was the final inspection. Not by the city, but by the people who had almost destroyed it. I opened the door. My parents stood there, holding a bottle of wine and a potted orchid, looking like nervous teenagers on a first date. Danica was behind them, holding a dessert box. Elliot brought up the rear. He looked humbled, wearing a sweater instead of his usual power suit. Without a word, Elliot stepped forward and handed me a manila envelope. I opened it right there on the porch. I scanned the documents, the withdrawal of the permit application, stamped by the county clerk on Thursday, the letter of correction, admitting to clerical error regarding ownership. It was sterile, legalistic, and exactly what I had asked for. "Okay," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." The moment they walked into the main living space, the tension that had walked in with them seemed to evaporate, replaced by a collective intake of breath. When they had last seen this room on the projector screen at the party, it was being promised as a glass and steel aquarium. Now, it was warm. The afternoon light flooded through the restored triple-paned windows, bouncing off the honey-colored oak floors. I had kept the original stone fireplace, but Grant and I had sandblasted the soot away to reveal the natural river rock beneath. The kitchen was open but intimate, with butcher block countertops and open shelving that displayed Mom's old blue ceramic bowls, which I had rescued from the attic. "Oh my," Mom whispered, her hand going to her throat. It feels exactly like it used to, but brighter." "It is beautiful, Violet," Dad said, walking over to the sliding doors that led to the reinforced deck. "You kept the view lines. You didn't obstruct the horizon." "I told you," I said, closing the door behind them. "I didn't want to change it. I wanted to save it." Danica wandered into the kitchen, running her hand along the edge of the island. She looked at the framed photos I had put up, black and white shots of us as kids on this very beach, mixed with artistic architectural shots of the renovation process. "I forgot about this picture," Danica said softly, pointing to one of us building a sandcastle in 1998. "Look at how serious you were. Even then, you were worrying about the structural integrity of the towers." I walked over to stand beside her. I just didn't want the tide to take it. Danica turned to me. Her eyes were clear, lacking the frantic energy she had carried for weeks. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low enough that our parents couldn't hear from the living room. "Growing up, I always felt like I was running a race I hadn't signed up for. Mom and Dad, they put all this pressure on me to be the social one, the pretty one, the one who married well. And you were just in your room, drawing, getting straight A's without even trying." She paused, looking out at the ocean. "I was terrified of you, Violet. I thought that if you ever decided to stop being quiet, everyone would realize that I was just the shallow copy and you were the real thing. That is why I wanted the house project. I wanted to prove that I could build something too, that I could be the visionary." It was a stunning admission. My sister, the golden child, had spent her life feeling like gold plating over cheap metal. "I hear you," I said, keeping my voice steady. And I appreciate you telling me that. It explains a lot. But Danica, your insecurity is not a license to steal from me. You can have all the feelings in the world, but you cannot use them to justify signing my name to a demolition contract. Danica nodded, tears pricking her eyes. I know that now. I wanted you to know it wasn't malice. It was panic. I accept that, I said. And for what it is worth, you are a great mother. You run a household. You are the one who remembers every birthday and organizes every holiday. That is building something too. You don't need to build a house to be valid. She let out a shaky breath, offering me a watery smile. Thanks, Vi. We moved into the living room where Elliot was standing awkwardly by the fireplace, looking like he expected the stone to bite him. When he saw me approach, he straightened up. Violet, he said, I want to say something, officially. My parents stopped talking and turned to watch. I am sorry, Elliot said. He looked me in the eye, which was a start. I am sorry for the email. I am sorry for the permit. But mostly, I am sorry for using my law degree as a weapon against my own family. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was finding a loophole. I realized too late that I was just being a criminal. I disrespected your property rights, and I disrespected you as a professional. He took a breath. I let my ambition to be the big man in town override my ethics. It won't happen again. It was a good apology. It hit all the points I had outlined in the conference room, but it sounded like he had actually internalized them. He wasn't just reciting a script. He looked genuinely ashamed. I accept your apology, Elliot, I said. The relief in the room was palpable. Shoulders dropped, smiles appeared, but I wasn't done. However, I added, holding up a finger, this is a one-time offer. We are hitting the reset button today, but if I ever find out that you have used my name, my credit, or my reputation without my explicit written consent again, for anything, even a dinner reservation, I will not call a family meeting. I will call the district attorney. We are family, but we are citizens first. Do we understand each other? Loud and clear, Elliot said, nodding vigorously. Absolutely. Good, I said. Then let's eat. Dinner was simple. I had made a large pot of seafood stew with crusty bread and a salad. No caterers, no servers, just us, sitting around the round oak table, passing bowls and tearing bread. The conversation started hesitantly, but then my father cleared his throat. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a page torn from my annual report. I was reading about that community center you designed in Portland, Dad said, adjusting his glasses. The one with the rainwater harvesting system. The report said you managed to reduce potable water usage by 70%. I looked at him, surprised. Yes, we used underground cisterns. That is incredible, Dad said, shaking his head. I mean, the engineering required for that. I was telling the guys at the golf club about it yesterday. I told them my daughter is practically saving the ecosystem of Maine single-handedly. My mother chimed in. And the library. Violet? The way you use the natural light so they don't have to turn on the overheads until sunset? I showed the pictures to Mrs. Gable. She was stunned. She asked why we never showed her your work before. Mom looked down at her plate, her voice softening. I told her it was because we were too busy talking, and not enough listening, but that we are catching up now. A lump formed in my throat. For 36 years, I had waited for them to see me. Not the Violet who set the table, but the Violet who built the table. And finally, here it was. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a trophy. It was just my father bragging about my water cisterns to his golf buddies, and it was enough. Thanks, Dad, I said, taking a sip of wine to hide the wobble in my voice. I can send you the blueprints if you want to see how the filtration works. I would love that, he beamed. As the evening wound down, we moved back to the deck to watch the sun dip below the waterline. The sky was a bruised purple, beautiful and dramatic. My parents were sitting on the new teak bench. Elliot was helping Danica clean up the dishes inside, and I stood by the railing, feeling the cool salt air on my face. It felt like a victory. The house was safe. My boundaries were established. My family was actually talking to me, not just at me. But as I watched Elliot through the glass door, drying a wine glass with a little too much vigor, a small, cold thought pricked at the back of my mind. Grant's investigation had proven that the IP address for the fake email came from Elliot's house. Elliot had admitted to it. He had taken the fall. It fit his personality, the arrogant lawyer who thought he could outsmart the system. But there was something about the specific phrasing of that fake email that still bothered me. I remembered Grant showing it to me. The tone was breezy, casual, using words like chic and vibe. Elliot didn't talk like that. Elliot talked in clauses and stipulations. Danica talked like that. I watched my sister laugh at something Elliot said, tossing a towel at him. They looked like a team again, a united front. I had my peace. I had my apology. I had my house. But as I turned back to the ocean, watching the waves erase the footprints on the sand, I couldn't shake the feeling that while the crime had been solved, the full anatomy of the betrayal had not been completely dissected. Elliot had executed the plan. Certainly. But I wondered, with a lingering chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze, whose voice had actually dictated the words that almost destroyed my home. I pushed the thought away. Tonight was for healing. Tomorrow, I would ask Grant for the full metadata file, just for my own peace of mind. "Violet," Mom called from the bench, "come sit with us. The stars are coming out." "Coming," I said. I walked away from the railing and joined my parents, leaving the dark ocean behind me. But I kept the key to the deadbolt in my pocket, just in case. The final piece of the puzzle arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried in a nondescript manila envelope by Grant Whitmore. The renovation was technically complete. The solar array was humming, the cedar siding was settling into its natural silver-gray hue, and the interior was fully furnished. But there was one loose thread I had been pulling at since the reconciliation dinner. Grant found me in the kitchen, brewing a pot of coffee. He placed the envelope on the butcher block island with a heavy thud. "You asked for the deep dive," Grant said, leaning against the counter. My IT guy went through the metadata of the spoofed emails again. We cross-referenced the timestamps with the server logs and the two-factor authentication requests linked to the domain registration. I stared at the envelope. And you were right to be suspicious about the voice," Grant said. "But you were wrong about the author." I opened the envelope. Inside was a timeline that looked more like a criminal evidence board than a construction report. It tracked the creation of the fake email address, the drafting of the messages, and the replies sent to Grant's firm. I scanned the data. The account was created at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday. The recovery phone number linked to the account wasn't Danica's. It was a number I recognized immediately because I had it saved in my phone as Elliot, emergency only. But the real smoking gun was the drafting history. The metadata showed that the emails weren't written in short bursts like Danica's frantic text messages. They were drafted, edited, and revised over hours. They were calculated. "He didn't just set up the tech for her," Grant said quietly. "He wrote every word. He mimicked what he thought a cool modern architect sounded like. He played the role of you, Violet, and he did it while his wife was asleep." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. For weeks, I had assumed this was a shared delusion, that Danica and Elliot had fed off each other's entitlement, but this report painted a different picture. Danica was the emotional driver. Yes, desperate for approval. But Elliot? Elliot was the architect of the fraud. He had seen his wife's insecurity not as a problem to solve, but as a vehicle to drive his own agenda. "He let her take the heat," I whispered. "At the party, in the conference room, he let her sob and apologize for her dream, while he stood there knowing he had engineered the whole thing." "Ambition makes people do ugly things," Grant said, picking up his hat. "What do you want to do with this?" I looked at the report, then out at the deck where the waves were crashing against the rocks. "I need you to take the rest of the day off, Grant," I said. "I have one last meeting to take." I texted Elliot. "Just him? Meet me at the beach house. Alone. 30 minutes. Do not tell Danica. He arrived 25 minutes later. He walked onto the deck where I was standing, looking nervous but trying to project an air of casual familial warmth. "Everything okay, Vi?" he asked, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his windbreaker. "Danica is at yoga. I told her I was running an errand." "You were," I said, not turning around. "You are here to finish the conversation we started in the hotel." I turned to face him. I didn't offer him a seat. I simply held out the report Grant had given me. "What is this?" Elliot asked, reaching for it. "It is the forensic breakdown of the fraud," I said. "It proves that Danica didn't write those emails. You did. You didn't just facilitate her delusion. Elliot, you weaponized it." Elliot scanned the pages. I watched his face shift. The apologetic brother-in-law mask he had worn at dinner slipped, revealing the calculating lawyer underneath. He realized there was no wiggle room. The phone number, the timestamps, the IP, it was irrefutable. "She wanted the house," Elliot said, his voice dropping, losing its warmth. "She was obsessed with it. I wanted to give it to her." "Bullshit," I said. The word hung in the salt air. "You didn't do this for Danica. If you did it for her, you would have confessed the moment Grant walked into the party. You would have protected her from the humiliation. Instead, you let her stand on that stage and look like a fool while you tried to debate contract law." I took a step closer. "Why, Elliot? Why risk your law license for a remodel?" Elliot looked at the ocean, his jaw working. Finally, he let out a short, bitter laugh. "Do you know what the polling numbers are for the city council seat in this district?" he asked. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The seat opens up next November," Elliot said, turning back to me. "I am running, or I was going to. The biggest issue in Crescent Bay right now is coastal preservation and property value. I needed a flagship project, something visible, something that showed I could take a dilapidated eyesore and turn it into a high-value asset for the community." He gestured to the house. The Herrera retreat was going to be my launch pad. I was going to host fundraisers here. I was going to use the before and after photos in my campaign brochures. Elliot Davis, rebuilding our heritage. It was perfect marketing. I stared at him, feeling a mixture of disgust and clarity. So Danica's emotional crisis, her need to please Mom and Dad, that was just a convenient cover for your political campaign? "It was a win-win," Elliot argued, though he looked smaller now. "She got her dream house, I got my platform, and you, honestly, Violet, I didn't think you would care." "Because I am the invisible sister?" I asked. "Because you are passive," Elliot snapped, his frustration finally breaking through. "For 10 years, I have watched you sit at dinner tables and say nothing while people talked over you. I have watched you let your parents ignore your career. I thought you were weak. I thought you would come home, see the construction, maybe cry a little, and then I would offer to pay you a usage fee, and you would go back to Maine and let us handle it. I banked on your silence." "You banked on the wrong currency," I said coldly. I took the report back from him. "You made 2 mistakes. Elliot, first, you confused silence with weakness. I am not quiet because I'm afraid. I am quiet because I am observing. I was building a case while you were building a fantasy." I tapped the folder against my palm. "And second, you underestimated how much I hate being used." I laid out his options. They were simple, brutal, and non-negotiable. "Option A," I said. "I take this file to the State Bar Association with the fraud, the identity theft, and the admission you just made about using real estate fraud for political gain. You will be disbarred before you can print your first campaign yard sign." Elliot went pale. "Violet, you can't. That destroys my entire career." "Option B," I continued, ignoring his plea. "You go home right now. You sit Danica down, and you tell her the truth, the whole truth. You tell her that you used her insecurity to fuel your political ambition. You tell her that you wrote the emails. You tell her that you almost got her arrested because you wanted a venue for your fundraisers." I looked him dead in the eye. You strip away the good husband act and you show her exactly who you are. If she chooses to stay with you after that, that is her business. But she deserves to know she is sleeping next to a man who viewed her trauma as a marketing strategy. Elliot looked at me, looking for a crack in my armor. He found none. He looked at the file in my hand, the weapon that could end his life as he knew it. "She will leave me," he whispered. "If she knows I used her, she will leave me." "That is a risk you should have calculated before you forged my signature," I said. "You have 1 hour. If I don't hear from Danica by tonight, I am mailing this envelope." Elliot stood there for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. He didn't say goodbye. He walked off the deck, down the stairs, and into his car. I watched him drive away. A man who had thought he was the protagonist of the story, finally realizing he was just the antagonist in mine. 2 days passed. The silence from the family was absolute. I spent the time finishing the final touches on the house, organizing the linen closet, stocking the pantry. I was preparing to fly back to Maine. On the third evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Danica. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen, her face devoid of makeup. She wasn't wearing her usual Crescent Bay mom uniform. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in and went straight to the sofa, sitting down heavily. "He told me," she said, her voice raspy. I sat in the armchair opposite her. "Everything?" "Everything." Danica nodded. "The campaign, the marketing plan, the fact that he wrote the emails while I was sleeping next to him." She looked up at me, and the pain in her eyes was raw. "I felt so stupid. Violet, all these years, I thought we were partners. I thought he was supporting my dream to fix up the house because he loved me and wanted me to be happy. I didn't know I was just a focus group for his voters." "I am sorry," I said gently. "I truly am." "I kicked him out," Danica said. "He is staying at a hotel downtown. I told him I need time, a lot of time. I don't know if we can come back from this." She took a deep breath and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "But I wanted to come here and thank you." "You don't have to thank me for blowing up your marriage, Danica," I said. "No," she shook her head firmly. "I do, because you gave him the choice. You could have just destroyed him publicly. You could have humiliated us both again, but you forced him to be honest with me. You gave me the dignity of knowing the truth so I could make my own decision." She looked around the room, at the sturdy beams and the warm light. "You saved the house from us," she whispered. "And in a way, I think you saved me from him. If he had become Councilman Davis, if we had won, I never would have known who he really was. I would have spent my whole life being a prop in his campaign." She stood up and walked over to me. For the first time in our lives, she didn't hug me like a performance. She hugged me like a sister who needed something solid to hold on to. "You are strong, Vi," she whispered into my shoulder. "I am sorry it took me 36 years to notice." "It is okay," I said, hugging her back. "I am here." She left an hour later to go back to her boys. I locked the door behind her and walked out onto the balcony. The sun was setting, casting a blaze of orange and violet across the horizon. The air was crisp. I could hear the hum of the inverter on the side of the house, converting the fading sunlight into stored energy. I looked at the solar panels glinting in the twilight. They were silent, efficient, and powerful. They didn't need to make a noise to work. They just absorbed what was given to them and turned it into something useful. I leaned against the railing, feeling the rough cedar under my hands. For so long, I had thought my value lay in how much I could endure, how much I could give, how much space I could shrink into so others could expand. But standing here, in the house that I had bought, saved, and rebuilt on my own terms, I realized that my value wasn't in my silence. It was in my structure. I had withstood the storm. I had stripped away the rot, and I had built something that would last. "This house is living proof," I thought, the words echoing in my mind as the first stars appeared. "I built this, I own this, and from this moment on, nobody gets to define my worth but me." not my parents, not my sister, and certainly not a world that mistakes quiet for weakness. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, clean air of my home. Then I turned around, walked inside, and turned on the lights. Lights powered by my own energy, burning bright and steady in the dark. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that country club terrace to this quiet balcony, and I hope it reminded you that your boundaries are worth fighting for. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a beach house, a city apartment, or maybe your own renovation site? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed watching the truth finally come out, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a reminder to stand up for themselves. See you in the next story.